Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Oh, I got to turn the microphone on. We're recording this session, so we'll be passing the microphone around. Oh, now you can hear that. So welcome to the Marriage Equality panel. My name is Kate Kelly. We'll each do our introductions, but I am choosing to currently practice a Mormon lifestyle, openly Mormon lifestyle. I'm Mormon. I'm in the Vienna ward. I served a mission in Barcelona, Spain, and my husband is taking pictures. We've been married for 5 years. And I wanted to introduce a little, just briefly introduce the panelists, things they might not say. To my left is State Senator Jamie Raskin. He's a leader in the Maryland State Senate on many issues, including but not limited to the marriage equality bill that just passed in March. He was the floor leader of the legislation, and it was signed by Governor O'Malley on March 1st of this year. So he'll be talking a little bit about the Maryland piece. Do we have any Marylanders in here? District 20? All right. And Senator Raskin is also a constitutional law professor at American University, Washington College of Law. So he can answer and if you have any constitutional questions or questions about marriage equality legislation. And then we have Hugo. Hugo is a longtime member of Affirmation. He met his partner at an Affirmation meeting in Salt Lake, and they were together for 11 years. Just last year, they got married, a year and a half ago, they got married in Washington, D.C., surrounded by friends and allies of the more radical Mormon community. So welcome, Hugo. And then we have Dr. Sharon Groves. Dr. Sharon Groves works with the religion and faith community in the Human Rights Campaign. She will talk a little bit more about their dual mission of marriage equality and also family outreach for LGBT people. So the way that we'd like this panel to work, I'm not really a big panel talking at the audience kind of person. This is like a very unruly Sunday school class. So please feel free to jump in. Please feel free, think of your questions. We'd like to maybe give about 5 minutes for each of the panelists to speak. But note down your questions. Let's have this be an interactive conversation. The only thing that will hinder that is that we are trying to record it. So when you do ask your questions, please try to speak into the mic. We'll be passing the mic around so that this can be podcast and people can listen to it on the World Wide Web later. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. I think we'll start with you, if that's okay. Cool. Professor Raskin.
What do I need to do here?
Just hold it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's next.
Great. Hey, hello everybody. Delighted to be here. Let's see, I'm not Mormon, I'm not gay, but I am Kate's law professor, which is how I think I got onto this panel. So, and I do have my own Book of Mormon that's inscribed in my name, and I understand that I can become Mormon at any point after my own death, and so that's but we passed the marriage equality legislation in Maryland this year, in the spring. I think Kate asked me to talk about it because religion played such a central force both in the politics surrounding the legislation and also within the debate itself and in defining the exact terms of the legislation that we enacted. And actually, I've become very much like the accidental champion of marriage equality because even before I got into the Maryland Senate, I was invited as a law professor to come testify there about a Republican effort to preempt the legislation by amending our state constitution to define marriages between one man and one woman, and I went to testify against it. And one of the senators said, Professor Raskin, you keep talking about equal protection and due process and the right to privacy, but what about the Bible? The Bible says marriage is between one man and one woman. And I was in a little bit of a fit of pique. I said, Senator, with all due respect, when you took your oath of office, you put your hand on the Bible and you swore to uphold the Constitution. You didn't put your hand on the Constitution and swear to uphold the Bible. And then that gave me my 10 minutes of internet notoriety that I needed, to catalyze at least like the civil libertarians and the gay community in my district, and it really helped me to get elected. And then so I worked very hard on the legislation. The first thing that happened was that, one thing that's important to remark is that there were religious groups on both sides of this, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that, but we had a lot of church groups come out to support it. A lot of Unitarian groups were part of it. Presbyterian groups were part of it. Really across the spectrum, we had different churches that got involved, Reformed Jewish congregations that helped out. So I would say that the religious community was split. However, the base of the anti-marriage operation was within particular religious groups. And they certainly formulated their opposition in religious terms. In fact, when we had our hearings, all of the anti-testimony, or almost all of it, was really expressed in terms of religion in the Bible and particular, books, Leviticus and so on. But the first kind of wave of attack was that this was going to compel churches to do things that were against their doctrine and their tenets, and of course that was easy enough to deal with. For one thing, the Constitution wouldn't allow that to happen. For another, our bill was called the Religious Freedom and Civil Marriage Protection Act, so religious freedom was built into it. And the key to understanding the whole issue is no church will ever have to perform wedding vows for any couple that they don't want to, whether it's a same-sex couple, an interfaith couple, an interracial couple. That's totally up to the church. But as a matter of civil law, we all have to have equality in marriage, which is a bundle of hundreds of rights and responsibilities and duties and privileges. It's got to be open to everybody on equal terms. So the way that I expressed it was the church decides who gets married in the church hall, but under the Constitution, we the people decide who gets married in City Hall or in the county hall. And that was a very important thing to try to get people to focus on, because the history of marriage obviously has been intertwined between church and state, but we need to keep them distinct for analytical purposes here. And I think once we communicated that, then the attack was simply, this offends whoever our is, this offends our religious scruples. But of course, we can't base people's rights on whether or not other people take offense to it, right? There are people who are offended by interracial marriages, but we decided in Loving versus Virginia, in Maryland, fortunately, we decided 6 months before that to get rid of our anti-miscegenation statute. But we've decided as a society that just because it offends some other people doesn't mean that you violate other people's right to love the person that they want and to create the life that they want and to set up the family that they want. And so I think it was the comedian Lenny Bruce who said that my parents came to America in order to be offensive. In other words, to be in a society where your way of life can offend other people without that getting you killed or having your rights taken away from you. It strikes me that that's essential to the principle of toleration, which is at the basis of a liberal society, and it's something that has deep resonance in Maryland, where the first act of religious toleration was adopted back in the 1600s, when they were still burning witches and hanging Quakers in Puritan Massachusetts. In Maryland, which was established as a Catholic colony, the principle of toleration was established very early. And so, we were able to invoke that history. So our basic point was we can vindicate two great principles at the same time. One is equal rights under law. Two is absolute religious freedom and liberty for people to lead their faith in the way that they want it. And I think that that's going to be the winning combination for us when this thing comes up for a referendum, as it's likely to do in November. I think the more people that we have out there talking about how this is consistent with their religious principles and their religious faith, and it's consistent with their constitutional faith and their civic faith, the better. And so I'm glad to see that we've got some Marylanders here, and we're going to be definitely needing everybody's help to get ready for the big referendum in November. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your work on the referendum, and also for your advocacy for all LGBT people who wish to be married. I wanted to bring the Mormon piece in a little bit. As most of you know, marriage is a very fundamental value for Mormon people. When we are growing up as youth, it's something that we aspire to, it's something that's talked about ad nauseum, and that is very central to our doctrine of eternal families. I believe in eternal families. Mormons cry a lot, sorry. You've seen Glenn Beck, so. I'm among friends. But I believe in eternal families, and there are close family members of mine who are gay, and I believe that they will be part of my family, and that they will have their own families. The first gay wedding I went to was when I was at BYU. It was in Spanish Fork, Utah. It was a commitment ceremony because Utah's not quite as progressive as Maryland. And I went, attended the wedding of a friend and his partner. It was a cloudy day. It was, it was a mix of sun and clouds, and we were a little bit worried that it would rain. And, they decided, it was in a garden, and it was, the beautiful trellis and all these things. And so they decided to go ahead with the ceremony, and, the rain was a little pending. So we all sat down, and it was a beautiful ceremony. And right as they began their vows, there was, and I kid you not, a large rainbow in the back of the scenery. A huge rainbow appeared. And I do not think that our heavenly parents were frowning upon that ceremony that day. That was a sign to me that that was a blessed union. And as a Mormon person, I did not grow up being progressive at all. I did not grow up thinking that gay people were living an acceptable lifestyle. I came to this as an adult, and that is the piece that I would like to contribute. And the conversations that I've had with so many family members, where I just have come to a point where it's a question of changing your mind. I think that we need paradigm pioneers. We've been talking a lot about pioneers today, and we're very proud of our Mormon pioneer heritage. I think what we need is paradigm pioneers. We need people like everyone who's here today, gay and ally, to help people change their minds. I was in California. I was living in California during Proposition 8. Some of you may have heard of. That was a very difficult time to be a Mormon in California for me. And my husband and I were actually campaigning for Ralph Nader in 2008, and we were working with a gay man who was very, very, very flamboyantly, joyously gay. And he loved us. You know, we're the only Mormons he knew. So he's like, Mormons are awesome. I love Mormons. I want to come to church with you guys. And he kept pushing this point. You know, he wanted to come to church with us. He wanted to come to church with us. And we kind of awkwardly put it off for a while. And finally, you know, we just had to have a literal come to Jesus moment where we told him, we would love to have you, but you won't feel welcome in our congregation. You'll notice that we are not at a Mormon church today. We're very grateful for the Community of Christ for welcoming us to their space, but Mormon churches are not a safe space for gay people. Okay, not all Mormons cry this much, but Mormon chapels are not a safe space for gay people yet. And I think that's a place where we as paradigm pioneers can change that. I think marriage is, and we can talk about this as we go on, but I think marriage is a real point for Mormons where they draw the line in the sand for a lot of reasons, but I think part of it is to be able to keep that one last thing that legitimizes same-sex relationships. And I'm glad that we can all be here as part of the journey, as part of the pioneering journey to change that within our community. So thank you.
Is it my turn?
It's your turn.
I'm going to fix something here, if I may. I grew up in the Mormon tradition, and I grew up learning about the importance of family and marriage. And my husband, John Charles, also grew up in the Mormon tradition, learning about the importance of families and marriage. So it's no surprise that when we found each other and we decided that we wanted to get married. It dawned on us that it would be easy to get married. In 2010, as you know, Washington, D.C. passed marriage equality in 2009, and at that time we were living in North Carolina. So for the first time, it was relatively easy and inexpensive to do it, to drive up here and to do it. Also, we have friends in Washington, D.C., and that's part of the story of getting married, to have friends with you. Now, from the legal point of view, it would have been enough for John Charles and me to go to the Superior Court of the District of Columbia on Indiana Avenue and 6th Street and go there and have a civil ceremony. But John Charles and I, we believe in the power of blessings, and we believe in the power of community. So we decided that this was going to be a celebration with our friends. And the first person we thought of was our friend Bill Russell, who is a member of the Community of Christ, a retired professor at Graceland in southern Iowa, and a very progressive guy. For years, he has been building bridges of understanding and friendship with Mormons, especially through the Sandstone Foundation, but also other organizations like the Association for Mormon History, blah, blah, blah. And we've known him for years. We presented papers together. We responded to each other's papers for many years. So the first person that we called was Bill Russell and his wife. He immediately got his wife, Lois, involved. And they came all the way from Iowa. They flew in at their own expense to be here on that day and to do a celebration, a blessing of our reunion. And at that time, John Charles and I were attending a very progressive Episcopal church in North Carolina. Really, we developed friendships and bonds with a lot of Episcopalians. And we found this church in Columbia Heights, which is called St. Stephen and the Incarnation. And it's probably the most progressive Episcopal church in Washington, D.C. They have always been there first, I think it was the first integrated Episcopal church in D.C. It was the first Episcopal church where a woman priest was allowed to celebrate the Eucharist. And since then, they have continued to be involved in issues of social justice. If you come from out of town and you need a place to spend the night, you can go with your sleeping bag there, and they will let you sleep in their sanctuary. They do that all the time. Well, they opened the doors, and we had a wonderful ceremony with our friends. Episcopal friends came from North Carolina, all our gay Mormon friends, and also progressive friends from other parts of our lives. Mormon friends came, and it was just an amazing ceremony. We read 2 scriptures before the blessing. And the first scripture that we read comes from Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. Then the Lord said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." And those of us who grew up in the Mormon tradition are more familiar with the King James Bible version that says, "I will make him a helpmeet for him." I do not have a PhD in theology like Sharon does.
Actually, in English, I'm not.
Oh, is it good? Okay. I don't know Hebrew, but I don't think I need a PhD in theology to tell you that one of the important themes of that scripture is companionship. Mm-hmm. Whether you believe in Adam and Eve, or Adam and Steve, or Thelma and Louise, I believe that companionship is a reciprocal relationship. I don't know if Mormons believe that. They talk about complementary roles, but ultimately different roles. One to preside and to lead, the other to be the support and have children. I believe that, of course, there are biological issues there, right? That are different, but I believe that companionship is a totally reciprocal relationship. So that scripture really applies to the relationship that I have with my husband. I am his companion, and he is my companion. Now, would we have preferred to get married in a Mormon temple? Well, I think that goes without saying. We grew up, I don't know how many sealings by proxy we did for people who died over the years, and we have done so many of those. So of course, but I don't think you can ask for a blessing from someone who has issued a curse on you. In the Old Testament, there's all those stories with Jacob, right? And it makes you believe that you can cheat someone out of his blessing, you can trick someone into giving you a blessing, you can demand a blessing. All those are stories in the Old Testament. In practice, I think that this is going to be a 2-step process with the Mormon Church. And the first process is to lift the curse and to end the destruction, the separation of families, the suicides. We need to help end the suicide of gay Mormon youth. Someday we will have to end the excommunication of same-sex couples who are living in monogamous, loving relationships. And someday we will have to stop claiming that you need to destroy my family in order to preserve yours. And when those 3 things happen, Caroline Person and I are going to be dancing on the streets. And then there will be a lot of time to talk about other things, what's going to happen in the other life, and theology, and ceilings in the temple. But we have a more urgent issue here that I want to address with the Mormon Church. When we got married, we decided it was going to be December 31st, the last day of the year. And every year we sent to about 500 of our closest friends a Christmas card. So this was the card that we sent on that year. And we added announcement. So to everyone who receives our Christmas card, they also received an announcement of the ceremony that we did. And we are proud and happy to be a married couple.
It's a real pleasure to be here with you all and to see the kind of transformation that you're making. And I wrote down, Kate, you wrote that we need to be paradigm pioneers. And I think that you all are doing that, and it's amazing. And it will change the church. Believe that. There's that old adage that you should not mix sex, politics, and religion. Well, I get to do that every single day of my life. So, and I think I have maybe the best job around precisely because I get to do that. In the work that I do, this is what we do. We talk about sexuality, sexual orientation, gender identity. We talk about faith, and we talk about politics. The vision that our program has is that no one, absolutely no one, should have to choose between who they love or who they are and their faith. And that it's not just tearing apart LGBT people, but it's tearing apart believing people as well. When they have to it's tearing apart families and mothers and aunts and uncles and just neighbors when they are put in a position to have to choose between what they believe and who they are, who they love. And so we believe that in our program sort of takes as its mantle that we want to begin to dismantle that. So, and to support, it really is just about supporting the work that people like you here are doing to transform the LDS Church. And sometimes that work is transforming it by stepping outside of it and sort of being a voice outside of that of that context, of the Mormon context, but calling it into accountability. And sometimes that means staying within the church itself and having to navigate really a difficult space of knowing that there are people that are left out, that are not included, that aren't welcome, and at the same time trying to be in that space as well. And I think that both ways of being need to be upheld and honored, and both are actually necessary for real transformation to happen. I think Kate asked me to talk a little bit about sort of some of the work around marriage, but also how do we talk to communities that might not be ready for a conversation about marriage, more kind of conservative religious communities. So I think we're in a really interesting moment in this country around religion and politics and LGBT issues and marriage in particular. For the first, well, let me put it this way. As some of you might know, and there's good reasons for this, the LGBT advocacy community, of which I'm a part, and many of you are as well, have been slow to actually embrace religion. The Human Rights Campaign has been around for 30 years, and it was 6 years ago that we chose to actually form a religion and faith program. And other secular organizations sort of followed suit, and within a year there were more, after we formed, many others formed as well. And that was really exciting that happened, but at the same time it kind of raises a question about, well, if 95% of the problem is with religious people, which it kind of is, or we might want to say with institutions rather than with actual religious people, with frankly Christian institutions. If the problem is 90 to 95% there, and we often see, when you look at arguments against marriage or really any LGBT position, oftentimes it's usually couched in religious discourse, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a religious person that's speaking that, but oftentimes, the discomfort is couched in a religious explanation. So if the problem is 95%, with religious institutions, it's an interesting historical lag that it took that long to sort of really actually form a program that would actually try to address religious voices with religious voices. And part of the reason for that is because LGBT people and allies have felt so alienated from religion. When people have been kicked out of their churches, when they've been told that their children can't be baptized, when they've been forcibly asked to leave or subtly shunned, it creates resentment, and then people don't want to deal with religious people. It's like sort of there becomes this kind of, they are the enemy out there. And so it's taken a long time for our community to get to the point to see, well, actually, this is kind of strategically unwise, and that we really do need to have religious voices talking to the religious right, which is largely our opposition, or oftentimes people from that have a backing with the religious right will be put into the kind of public arena. And what has happened typically is that that's been countered by secular voices. And so there's been this need. So people finally got the sense in our movement that we needed to have actual religious voices countering the religious right. So what we're seeing, and that was understood as a kind of strategic move, I think, about 6 years ago when our program started. What we're seeing now is a real transformation, and I think it's Paradigm Pioneers, as you talked about, that's making that transformation happen. So at this point, it's not just, as Senator Raskin said, like religion has become a really strong piece in the Maryland campaign, and that's not just the religious opposition, but it's the forces that are calling for marriage equality as a principle of faith. And we're seeing that across the country. In Washington State, they're getting ready to do some significant faith organizing. They have 7 or 8 faith organizers in Minnesota. In North Carolina, the way that campaign to defeat a really problematic amendment called Amendment 1, which would make marriage between a man and a woman the law of the land, that the work to defeat that has been largely done around, in the context of religion. So they're seeing this growth in religious voices in this work, and that's not going to go away. That's only going to get stronger. And as it gets stronger, I think it kind of begs the question about what is the role that faith can actually play in transforming how we do this campaign stuff. I mean, we all can have a role to play in terms of kind of calling campaigns, calling our political, the political sphere to an understanding of what draws us as people of faith. What is that piece? Why do we care? I think that our faith traditions have an awful lot to say that's positive about how we do our work in the public arena. So I'm really excited about this moment because I see that beginning to happen, and it is this Paradigm Pioneers that are shifting the equation. Now, on the other hand, so we are deeply involved in that work, and we're involved in Maryland, and hope to get you all to sign on to Support Maryland work before this is over. On the other hand, I think that there's real important work that needs to be done with more conservative communities that are not ready yet to have the conversation about relationship recognition of some sort or another, whether or not we talk about that as civil unions or marriage equality. I don't think that the only approach that we should have with religious institutions should come through marriage. So one of the things that we've been looking at, and it's actually been through our work with folks from Affirmation, from talking to Carolyn, to many of you, and actually even having conversations with some people in the LDS Church, that we've decided that we understand that this notion of family is enormously important, and that we ought to be looking at how can we create family acceptance in our families, and what's the role that faith is playing in that. In Utah, for instance, I think the rate is 41% of young people who are homeless that identify as LGBT. So that's an enormous percentage. The rate is between 20 and 40% or 42% across the country. And you see that it's highest in areas where there's a more conservative religious tradition. Now that seems to me to be really counter to the values of the LDS Church, which wants to support families and keep cohesive families and sees family as a core piece of the faith. So it may be that one way that we begin to have a conversation is to talk around how do we build family accepting households and what difference is that going to make to the life of our young people, however they identify. So that's something that we're looking at as well, and I think that's a sort of, there's, you know, in our work we have kind of these two circles. It's the kind of mobilizing progressive religious voices for the various campaigns, which tend to now be marriage campaigns or fighting really horrible amendments. That's on the one hand, and then on the other, it's this work around how do we begin a conversation with more conservative spaces where we begin with a place of deep, fundamental respect for the tenets of the religious faith. So it doesn't become like as I like, some people talk about, like, it's sort of my Leviticus is bigger than your Leviticus. We don't need to have that kind of conversation, but we can start with, you know, we honor your faith and who you are as a person of faith. And then let's look at, like, how can we begin to have a conversation from that starting place about what we're doing to our families. So that kind of is a sense of, I wanted to give you just this sort of scope of, I think, not just the work of our program, but the work that I see kind of happening in this sort of arena that's really exploding around faith and LGBT issues and politics right now.
And I did want to mention that Senator Raskin does have to leave a bit early. He called me and said, I'm going to have to go introduce Elizabeth Warren later today. Do you think it's okay if I bow? I'm like, yeah, okay, that's okay.
She was my professor. So.
Okay. So you're paying it forward. So if anyone did have questions specifically for Senator Raskin, there's a microphone up here. Should we use this one, or should?
It would be great if we can pass this one, because this one tapes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, my question is for you, Senator, and that is, what kind of, you must have known some people who are anti-marriage equality who reversed their position. Can you give us some examples of what you said, how that went?
Yeah, yes, indeed. Yeah. Right here.
Let me get this one. This is better.
Okay, cool.
This mic is not good.
We'll pass it back and forth like the conch and Lord of the Flies. But yes, indeed. Well, that was, really my favorite part of the whole experience was seeing people's minds change. One is the guy I sat next to in the Senate. His name is James Brogan, a senator from Baltimore County, who had voted against it and felt strongly against it. And everyone kept saying to me, "When are you going to get Jim to change his mind? When are you going to change his mind?" And I realized, I took it from his perspective, that it was really going to be an evolutionary process. For him, the whole thing was the word marriage. He had said from the beginning, I absolutely favor equal rights. I think people should be able not to face discrimination because of their sexual orientation, but I just think marriage is between one man and one woman. And I think we brought him to a point of saying, okay, even if you still have that reservation or that misgiving because you've always understood the word to mean that, given that the choice is between denying people hundreds of rights and benefits in property law and medical visitation and family law rights and children and so on, or the discomfort that other people have to feel, at least for a while, in knowing that other people are using this word, which way you're going to go. And I could see he was teetering on that. And then we had the hearings, and the Equality Maryland did a terrific job of setting up the panels that we had, and there were religious people, and there were scientific people, and there was a lot of testimony by children of gay couples, and a lot of family stuff. And on the other side, it really was just a parade of hatred and bigotry. And after that hearing, he said, I'm going with you guys. And when he talked about it, he confessed that he was still a little uncomfortable with the work. And that was several months ago. I don't even think he's uncomfortable anymore. I think that really was an evolutionary process for him. There were some funny conversations. We had, I was with one group of senators, someone said, it's not same-sex marriage I've got a problem with, it's same-sex sex. That's the big deal. And then another person said, well, if you don't like gay sex, you should support gay marriage because everybody knows there's no sex after marriage. Then there was another guy who said, same-sex marriage, I've got one of those. I've been having the same sex for 40 years, I think at a certain point, people begin to recognize this is silly, the way that the kids have. I think that there's been a generational motor of this thing for a long time. My kids just don't even really understand it. They don't get it. And when we had the vote, the president of the Senate, who's a Democrat, Mike Miller, he voted against it, but he said, I know that I'm on the wrong side of history here. I see where everything's going. But he said he was a product of his circumstances and his upbringing. And I thought that was one of the most moving things to hear somebody say in one of these debates. Certainly the most moving thing that anybody voted against it said. We had a couple of Republicans also come out for it. I sent out to my Republican colleagues a front-page Washington Post article that talked about how the Tory party in England has embraced same-sex marriage as their way to try to create a bridge to young people, to say, yeah, we are a modern, hip party. We can, we're not just, what was the old William F. Buckley line, standing athwart history yelling, stop, don't go there, They're trying to say, well, we understand that this is consistent with a lot of conservative values and family. Can I just ask two quick questions before I go? One is there like a Mormons for Marriage group or something like that? Or,
Yeah.
There is. Good. Well, we definitely need that out in Maryland. That would be great.
There's a Mormons for Marriage Maryland group too.
The M to the third, M cubed. Okay. And then the other thing is, as I'm listening to this, and I should say that in all of these discussions within every church, I did everything I could not to be pulled into theological debate. Because there's a debate within Episcopalianism and within Presbyterianism, and my whole thing was, that's great, people can have their debate within their church, but we've got to make a decision for the whole society on secular grounds, But I will say, because now I've got a little glimpse, I'm like a stranger in a strange land here, but I've got a little glimpse into the dialogue that's taking place within LDS, the church itself, of course, was historically the target of such bigotry and stereotyping and persecution based on marriage and the marriage question. And I don't know, whether that explains some of the passion that we get from the church on this question. It's like they protest a little too much, on behalf of one man and one woman, But it seems to me that somebody who knows a lot more about the theology than I do could, raise this as a point that people should not be persecuted according to the way that they want to lead their life. But I don't know, maybe that goes too far. Inevitably in these debates, somebody would say, well, if we're going to allow, 2 men or 2 women to marry, then, why can't one man have 3 wives or one, And my answer was always, let's let everybody marry one person before some people get to marry 3 or 4 or 5 people. One person at one time. But I do think that the specter of the Reynolds case, which was the case that upheld anti-polygamy legislation against Mormons, does hang over a lot of this, topic. And at the very least, if it can't move the church on the question and change its mind, maybe it can at least get Romney to stand down a little bit, because I know the last thing he wants to talk about is the history of polygamy within the church and his family. So, so with that provocative suggestion, I'm going to leave. So.
Thanks again to Professor Raskin. He's always a delightful speaker, as he is provocative, and also a wonderful teacher. I just want to open it up again to questions or comments anyone else has.
This is a little bit off the subject, but being from the HRC, I have been very concerned about the anti-bullying legislation that is pending in our U.S. Congress. Can you speak to that from the point of view of the children of our marriages? And we're all one family, we're all one people.
Yeah, I kind of want to, this is awkward to have one mic because I sort of want to do a little bit of a back and forth there. So yes, you're right. I mean, it is a horrible thing. The legislation doesn't seem like it's moving terribly quickly right now, but we need to continue to put some pressure on. One of the things that we do is we've been doing some work. There's a really interesting program that we've got in our what we call our family project, which is sort of like a sister to the religion and faith program. And they do a project called our Welcoming Schools program, and it's just taken off like gangbusters. And what it does is it's a K through 5 curriculum that is being picked up by a number of school districts to basically teach a level of tolerance in elementary school, because there's an understanding that we need to begin to start there to be able to deal with some of the bullying issues that we're facing. But it is an ongoing concern that we address all the time. We've been sort of addressing it besides that kind of programmatic piece, kind of looking at it in a more kind of case-by-case level and then at the legislative level. But it is something that I think is a very pressing need to address. So.
I understand that there are 34 senators who have signed on to the State School Improvement Act.
Yes.
And the Student Non-Discrimination Act.
Yes.
Are we making individual...
So you've kind of gotten me out of an area of my expertise. So what I know about that is that there is some progress that's happening, that we continue to go after individual senators, that it's not on the immediate horizon right now. There's a possibility that one of those two acts, and I don't remember which one, could be voted on in the lame duck session, but that's a small window. So it's not great right now. The prospect is not enormously. There's not a lot of sunshine around it right now, but a lot's going to depend on the outcome of this next election.
Hi, my name is Spencer Clark. I find it very interesting to see, of course, how this issue is evolving, and having recently moved back to Maryland, I'm very interested in continuing to work for and be a voice in the Mormon community for marriage equality in the state. And I just wanted to get your opinions on what do we think is most effective in changing hearts and minds? I mean, it seems from what we saw in the legislative session, and what we continue to see, is that the more familiarity people have with gay individuals, and particularly with gay couples and families, that the more they've known, the more we see, oh, one, they exist, B, two, these are good, normal people, that seems to have one of the greatest effects on people's minds, and saying, okay, well, maybe this is something I can support. But I was curious to see, in your experience and the research that has been done, I mean, on what ways and on what points can we as Mormons best, emphasize why this is something that others could support, and how do we, change hearts and minds in regards to this issue, and not just drive deeper and deeper wedges like you've seen in the abortion debate that makes it almost intractable for anyone to change their position over time.
So I'll start with a general observation, and then I'd be really interested in what others have to say from a specific Mormon context. So I think it's Spencer, right?
Yes.
Okay, Spencer, I think you're really correct that the most important thing that we've found is when people know people. That's what makes the difference. I mean, that's more important than any theological argument you're going to have. It's like actually having a face-to-face conversation When people have to deal with somebody that they've met, that they see as a moral, upstanding person, and then they have to navigate. Well, like, is that person really going to go to hell? Is this relationship really sinful? And they have to sort of wrestle with that. And I think for those of us that want to be to have conversations, it's really important. One of the most important things is to have a sound community around you, because people are they're going to be, when you have conversations, people are going to move in all sorts of directions. And I think at this moment, things are very fluid. I liked what Senator Raskin was saying about, what was his name? The senator that, not Brochin, the head of the Senate, the Democrat, Miller, that's right. And I actually heard him when he said, history is on the side of marriage equality, but I'm not there yet. I wouldn't be surprised if in 3 months he's there. People, this is a very, very fluid moment, and people are changing their minds all the time. And they have, some of the research that we've seen is people begin a conversation and they don't want to end it. And where you find where they end up, it's not where they started. So for people that are LGBT folks that are wanting to have conversations, it's so important that you have a sound grounding, because you're going to get a lot of stuff that's going to come at you of people as they're discerning and are working through a process. But I think the most important thing is to actually have those conversations first. The second thing, and this is where there's more experts in the room here than certainly I am, but I think the theological piece is an important piece. And what we found is that doesn't need to be like you don't have to have a background in theology to do this, but if you're able to talk to somebody about what I believe and what my faith means to me, and how I understand my faith community and the power of that, and the power of God and Jesus in my life, and then you ask somebody else to have that conversation, that's much more, that's a much more helpful approach than sort of kind of say, like, talking about, in your interpretation of Leviticus, I can't eat shrimp, and on that, the fat or the 2-fiber thing that people like to talk about. You don't have to be heady and smart and the smartest kid in the class, but if you really get to a heart place and like, what is it that I believe? What do you believe? Let's start from there. That's what we found is much more effective. But to also come to go into that space, to talk to people as a person of faith. So it's like, claim the faith that you have and don't run away from it. Don't cede that. For too long, I think that the religious right has been able to cede religion, the frame of religion, as theirs, and it's not true. And we need to be able to claim it and be able to speak our truth and our faith journey. So.
Amen, sister. Yeah, amen. Thank you, Spencer. Thank you so much for what you are doing, because it's people like you. I am an apostate. I am out of the dialogue. But it's people like you who have the power to change the hearts and minds of the grassroots. So.
As someone who changed my mind, I think I can speak from that place. When I was living in California, the LDS Church was very active in Proposition 8. Our ward, I would say, during our services, we talked about Proposition 8 directly at least 50% of the time during the campaign, at least, bare minimum. This is like if we goes in to talk about something else. There were direct solicitations for money at church, passing around a box and putting cash in it. I mean, there's a lot of other things I can talk about, but it was a very difficult time for me. And when it came down to voting, I was conflicted, and I felt really conflicted by the pressure that was put on me by the church and what I felt was wrong. And on my own, in my head and my heart, and I did end up voting against Proposition 8, and that was a turning point for me when it came to taking people's rights away, because for me, I mean, we can talk about like salient arguments, but for one of them for me is there are a lot of things that I don't believe, or that Mormons don't drink. We're not advocating for prohibition anymore. Mormons don't, there's a lot of things that we believe that we don't legislate or enforce on other people. So I think that's one very salient argument that was very effective in my transformation. Also, knowing people obviously is very, it has a big impact on your heart. And I think for me, actually, within Mormonism, we need to change the conversation about sexuality, period. Not homosexuality, not heterosexuality, just sexuality. The conversation is very anti-sex, period. Or maybe I'm just going to the wrong words, but it's a very dangerous, dark, heavy, prohibitive subject when it's talked about in a lot of ways. And so to me, that conversation needs to change. It's no surprise to me that any sort of type of particular sexuality is targeted because of the general vibe around sexuality in the church. So I think, to me, that needs to change, and that will go a long way. And the last piece I would like to talk about, as far as changing hearts and minds, I had a 2-hour conversation with my dear mother yesterday about gay marriage, since she's an attorney, and she is struggling with this issue. And she said to me, much like what Jamie said, I know I'm going to have to change my mind, but I'm not there yet. And I think that's a place we need to get to in the church, where through meeting people, through having people speak out. I personally find it very difficult to speak out, for example, in Sunday school, which is why Neil and I remain happily in nursery. They tried to kick us out. We're like, nope, nursery's fine, thanks. We like 3-year-olds. They don't say anything awkward. And so it's difficult. It's difficult to be the one that says, I actually disagree. I just disagree. But I think that goes a long way. And it's a very brave act in the LDS Church, and I think it goes a long way. And I do think it needs to come from allies more than it does. So I think that's another thing. Having people hear you say, I disagree.
It's time to finish.
Okay. And should we do one last question? Okay, so one last question. Who has a burning in their bosom?
You were wondering how the rhetoric about sex could be changed. And in my experience in Mormonism, they refer to it as the sacred powers of procreation. When I think of people having sex, what percentage of their time is the sacred power of procreation? Is it 1% of the time they have sex that it results in procreation, or even less than 1%? Every time I hear it called the sacred power of procreation, I think there has to be a better word for it than that. How about just the highest ability to bond or something like that? That's my contribution.
I think that more Latter-day Saints today need to read one of the first missionary tracts the church ever published by Parley P. Pratt, called Intelligence and Affection. This was one of the principal ideas that the Mormons were preaching in England in the 1840s. It was about human sexuality. They used the euphemism affection, but it was all about the bonding, the sexual bond between husband and wife. That this was, the basis of society here and in the eternities. So this, I've never understood. I was a convert to the LDS Church. I was never understood, having read Parley P. Pratt's 1830s and 40s writings on sex. When I joined the LDS Church in 1977, could not wrap my mind around all my LDS friends and their phobia of all things sexual. It just seemed very un-Mormon to me. So.
I love that. I want to get that and read that. It's fascinating. I know since I wanted to make a quick pitch, since I briefly alluded to this earlier, but we are working very actively. In fact, 2 of the staff people at the Religion and Faith program, which is basically all but me and one other person, are full-time working with the Marylanders for Marriage Equality effort. And I would get in a lot of trouble if I went back and came back with a sign-up sheet that had no signatures on it. So if you're if you would like to be involved, we will contact you and by email, and there's a lot of, we're just kind of getting started with the kind of faith mobilizing effort. It would really be helpful to have LDS members that would be part of that work. This just, you can decide what this means for you. This is not, you're not, there'll be some pressure, but it'll be mild around sort of how, like the level of engagement. If you don't want to, another way to be engaged that we would encourage is to have conversations. If you think about having one conversation, the ambitious one would be one conversation a day with somebody that you want, that's in Maryland, that you would like to have support marriage equality. And the more you do that, the easier it gets. So I'm going to pass this around, and again, if you just sign this up, we'll send you an email and let you know how to be involved. Do you want to give the pen to? Thanks.
I just want to end by saying that I think marriage equality is also one way that we can convince Mormons that on the issue of LGBT rights, because I think that a sticking point that a lot of people that I've talked to is that they can't get married. And so I think it's actually kind of cyclical, and I think it will be a good step for an excellent step for marriage equality to exist in every state, and one of the last bastions of inequality to be remedied. So I'd also just like to thank Dr. Sharon Groves and also Hugo Salinas for being on the panel, and Professor Raskin, and thank you so much for coming as well.
Come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy.